What a sobering conversation there. And of course, it is a Monday. We delve straight into relationship chats, but also linking it to this particular conversation we've just had now. This in light of the fact that the World Health Organization, they report that globally up to 1 billion children aged 2 to 17 years have experienced physical, sexual, or emotional violence or neglect in the past year. That is a heartbreaking report to have to unpack. Now, as we are in the midst of the 16 Days of Activism campaign for no violence against women and children, we're shining a light on some of the most vulnerable who are suffering from domestic and gender-based violence, and these are young people.
Yeah, but today, of course, we are here to educate you and enlighten you with more information. Now, how are children affected by GBV and domestic violence? That's the question that we're asking today. And clinical psychologist Asha Dullabh is here today to help us discuss this, and we're taking your questions and comments via our Facebook page as well. So bring them through, and of course, we're going to dive straight into this. Firstly, Asha, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm well.
It's a shocking report that's come through from the World Health Organization. From the years 2 to 17, over 1 billion of them have been abused in some way or another in the past year.
Yes.
Come on. Why are children so vulnerable to abuse in that regard?
So children are vulnerable because they are pure innocence. They are being raised in homes where they are in survival mode, depending on their caregiver to nurture them and protect them. But unfortunately, these kids are easily manipulated. They are easily influenced. And, you know, some parents see their children as property, not as individuals, as young kids with their human rights. And trauma plays out in the family homes, and these children are unfortunately vulnerable to all the abuse that parents themselves face in their own, history, and then it plays out in the home. It also links to parenting styles, and very often what happens in the home is regarded as private. So what happens in the home stays in the home, and then that secrecy and silence breeds in the home, and the poor child is left in this survival, fight, flight, freeze mode.
Traumatic.
Yes.
What are some of these sort of, let's say, acts of violence? Because some of us might see it as, oh, that's obvious, but some of it might not be so obvious. When it gets enacted on children, though, what type of violence is it that we're kind of talking about here?
So apart from obviously the sexual, psychological, social, if you look at just maltreatment, neglect of children in the household, isolation, rejection of children, those are all traumas that prevail within kids. And of course, there's gang violence, there's, children interacting with other kids that are not good company for them, lack of emotional bonding with parents and children, lack of empathy in the home, and it's a perpetuating pattern that evolves.
And Asha, when are children really most at risk of having, these acts of, I suppose, abuse enacted upon them? What kind of environments are we talking about here? When does that take place, or where?
In environments where there is already mental illness in the home, that's a risk factor. Of course, where there's alcohol and drug abuse, that's also adds to the pattern of abuse. There are many on an individual level, on a societal level, the low income groups, lack of education. It goes on forever, the list is endless, but those are the ones where they are just surrounding themselves in communities where there are already aggression taking place, violence, access to weapons. That's quite prominent these days.
I think the difficult thing about that environment for children is that they don't have a choice. Children it's not that they can decide, okay, well, I'm leaving this. And then, children find themselves in spaces that they have very little control over.
Yes.
And that is most disheartening. Asha, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, of course, don't go anywhere. Asha Dullabh will be back for some more, and we'll be diving deeper into this conversation right now when it comes to GBV and, of course, domestic violence. Come through with your questions on our Facebook and Instagram pages and all our socials, because we will be tackling that in just a bit. And, of course, stick around, because this conversation is about to get even more interesting.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to it, your feel-good breakfast show, Expresso, live here on S3. Stop violence against women and stop violence against children. That's the message, and we're shining the spotlight on that as we talk relationships this Monday. We're asking the question, how are children affected by GBV and domestic violence? Because it is very obvious. There is an effect, a very direct one as well, on children. We're back with clinical psychologist Asha Dullabh to unpack this topic. So do weigh in, please, with your questions and your comments on our Facebook page. Asha, thank you for sticking around.
Yeah. Look, we're talking about the impact. I want to get straight into it.
Yeah.
The impact of violence against children. What is that impact exactly? And also, what is the long-term impact of that? We're talking about character types, archetypes coming through. What exactly is actually happening here?
You get some immediate impacts and, of course, long-term. I mean, immediate impacts can be anything from, let's start off with death, right? And then, of course, there's cognitive impairments, mental impairments, behavioral problems that can arise, which can lead right into adolescence. And this is where it actually manifests a lot when little kids are going through abuse, and then, of course, it plays out in adolescence. But the long-term effects, obviously, they are prohibited from, getting the educational resources. There's low income that perpetuates. But the mental well-being and the physical well-being is incredibly important to take note of, because our nervous system can be impacted. To live in that atmosphere and energy of abuse is debilitating. And there's not enough services that can just offer the counseling that is needed to remedy these kids.
Well, last week we had a chat about the damaging effects of gender-based violence on women. Is there a link between such violence and the violence enacted upon children?
Absolutely. It is deeply intertwined, those two, because what happens in the home with the woman, what plays out in intimate relationships, often plays out with the kids, and very often for the very same reasons, whether it's an alcohol and drug substance abuse circumstance, whether there's low income, it's parenting style, the way parents discipline their kids. I mean, think about a woman that is being abused. I mean, how they may be disciplining their kids out of all that anger, that shame, that helplessness. They can even, research is showing that they actually impart abuse on their kids, women themselves, because they're not dealing with the trauma of the abuse. So there's perpetuating violence, and like I said, children are abusing children these days.
Oh, so that's what happens, because those children learn that style and that attitude and that energy at home.
Yes.
They go and abuse other children.
That's it.
And it's a cycle.
Yes. We all need to raise ourselves before we can raise kids. I mean, parents need to be looking at themselves, raise themselves, and then raise the kids.
Weighing on what you just mentioned when it comes to women, when it comes to young girls, is there a disproportionate sort of result when it comes to gender-based violence? Are they affected differently, more so than maybe young boys?
Yes, because women are seen as inferior, weaker, and of course, we have forced marriages at a young age, we have trafficking that happens, forced intimate relationships in adolescence, really, which promotes pregnancy and just disenables the woman, making them feel helpless, hopeless, and then it then becomes an ongoing circumstance of the possible abuse that can happen.
Oh, Asha Dullabh, you really are spilling the beans today. And it's not the most favorable conversation that we can have on relationships, but it's a very, very necessary one to have. As we commemorate 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children, we're looking at how GBV and violence at home trickles down to the children and how children then are affected socially when it comes to those effects. So please do weigh in. Expresso Morning Show, SABC3, when we return after this.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Yes, welcome back, you beautiful souls. Continuing the conversation right now, and an important one indeed. We're talking about relationships, and today we're asking the question, how are children affected by GBV and domestic violence? Now, we're still sitting in with our psychologist, the resident, our family member. It's Asha Dullabh here. She's unpacking this topic. So, of course, you guys can weigh in on your questions and comments on Facebook if you do have any, and she will be assisting us throughout the day. And you can reach her on the socials too if you have any pertinent issues that you'd like to discuss or divulge in. But for now, we're still tucking into this one.
We're getting into it. Children are very important to me. I love them so much, and anyone who abuses children really angers me, and honestly, I can't even express it. What do we need to do as society? What does government need to do? What do we need to do collectively to put an end, to put a stop to the violence against children at an institutional level and all levels of society?
I think that we are doing it right now, having the conversations, having the dialogue. We need to create more empathy. There's a lack of empathy with regard to this topic, and I think looking at parenting styles is also important. How are parents parenting their children, not only just using this concept of discipline, are there any other ways, more positive, conscious parenting? Of course, trying to just raise that awareness that we all speak about. But the World Health Organization has got a wonderful acronym, Inspire, and I think they address all the relevant aspects to how we can deal with that. The word Inspire is the implementation of organization strategies to help. You know, the acronym, the N stands for the norms, you know, just sort of re-looking at the norms, the safety, the parenting styles, the income groups, and of course just looking at education. And just reinventing the narratives that we are all so stuck in. So, being inspired, when one is inspired, there's passion. Like you spoke about that passion for kids. We need to develop the passion to really prevent and offer services as well. So that it's double-fold. You know, it's prevention as well as access to services. And I think we need to be doing both concurrently on all levels.
And actively. Intentionally and actively must be an important mission for all of us.
Yes,
I love that.
yes.
The work can also be done at home, I'd imagine. I mean, if you have a child or have a kid and you are bringing them up now, I would imagine it's quite important to ensure that there's somewhat of a gender equal relationship.
Yes.
On top of that, I think it's also important that it's nurturing, that doesn't have any violence, right?
Yes,
How do we physically go about this, and why do you think that's obviously so important?
Again, it's looking back to parenting styles, how our parents are parenting, and looking more at positive relationships, connectedness between child and caregiver, whoever the caregiver is, doesn't necessarily have to be the parent, but also extends to school systems, anyone that has access to children, looking at really authentic connection. But that comes with, just the loving kindness, the gentleness, the unconditional love, going right back to the core root of raising a child. And like I said earlier, parents, adults, caregivers need to raise themselves before they can raise a child. And we need that empathy and compassion for each other.
Take a moment, take a pause. Pause every day. Be intentional about loving your children. And your children aren't just your children. Children next door are also your children. Love them, nurture them. When you see children going through something at home next door, do something about it. We all have a responsibility. We all have a role to play in society to make sure that children aren't polluted by the scourge of GBV and all other forms of violence that are enacted amongst or upon their parents or even them directly.
And on that note, Tubbs, I think it's just important to also note that if you are a kid at home that is struggling, you're feeling alone, or you need someone to chat to, then you can reach out to the number on screens right now and you can get the help that is definitely needed if so.
And speak to teachers as well. Teachers have an important role. Thank you so much, Asha, for being a part of this conversation.
Sure.